Hello, class for the 31st of March. I hope you're doing all right. I'm kind of feeling cooped up here in Maryland. Our governor yesterday issued an order to shelter at home. So you can't go out unless you're picking up groceries or medicine. And the police will stop you, and you have to have a letter giving you permission that you're from an essential part of society to be traveling around. I've been reading a lot, working in my yard, cooking more elaborate meals, eggplant parmesan tonight. I recommend that. I recommend you get up, you don't stay in your pajamas all day, you exercise and do things like that. Uh, for today, we're going to talk about poverty, and we'll probably talk two classes about poverty and the American political thought, the difference between the left and the right on poverty questions. Now, it all revolves around the kind of victory for progressivism in the United States. That is, in the last 100 years, progressivism has had it such that we have a problem, government looks at that problem, it rationally tries to solve it, and U.S. society is better because of it. So that it uses a kind of rationalistic model to attack a problem like poverty. That would mean that in government, you would have experts who are university credentialed, who know this area, who are put into parts of government like health and human services, and that we can then attack the problem in a rational way. There's an inhibition to this rationalistic model because there's so much disagreement about the problem itself. Now, this would be how we would expect the rational model to work. We got poverty out in society. We have this arrow as a demand that government do something about it. Government does something about it. We have policies that come out, and then in a rationalistic model, we have experts that evaluate how are these policies doing? Are they alleviating policy? This is the feedback. That feedback should go back to the original input, and we should then be able to change the programs to alleviate the problem. Difficulty with using the rationalistic model is that the left and the right disagree about so much having to do with poverty and what we should do about it. I say right because remember the libertarians left the conservatives when we did culture war issues, but they're back over on the political right on this question of poverty and the economy in general. Now, the left and the right disagree on so many things that make it difficult to carry out this rationalistic model. Like, for instance, who should be considered poor? The left they have a much larger definition of poverty and poor people in the United States than the right. I would say an expansive definition that wouldn't be unpopular on the political left would have 25% of people in America really live in poverty. How serious a problem is it? Well, the left thinks it's a serious problem, and we probably should have much larger inputs into the welfare state to try to deal with poverty, more so than on the political right. A key question that left and right disagree on is why do we have poverty? I mean, isn't this how a rationalistic model has to work? You have to first understand the causes of a problem to deal with it. For instance, we know we have this problem now with COVID-19 because we know there's a small little virus that's passed from person to person. We know under what conditions it lives and how it can be killed. This is how we've tried to come up with rational public policies. That in fact, we don't have a way to kill this virus. We don't have a vaccine yet. Meanwhile, we have to keep a distance between us so it can't spread from person to person. This is a rational approach to try to attack this. We would need that in order to attack poverty in the United States, but we don't have that. Now, how does the government describe this problem of poverty in America? Well, the government sets a poverty line that changes from time to time. In this year, in 2020, a family of four with an income less than $26,200 is considered below the poverty line and living in poverty. We have about 14% of the population are below the poverty line. That comes out to 46 million people. Now, the right and the left also differ on how they describe poverty. The left has estimates that are higher than the right, and they think that poverty line is set too low, that there are people called the near poor, which are living not much above subsistence level, and they should be counted. Whereas the political right tends to minimize the problem of poverty when I read them. Wall Street Journal or some of the experts at right-wing think tank like the American Enterprise Institute. Uh, their description is that people that live in poverty in the United States live better than most people who ever walked the face of the earth. They have cars, access to all kinds of food, they have air conditioning, and they really don't live so bad. So they tend to minimize it on the political right. Plus, the political right believes that there are many instruments whereby people can get out of poverty in the United States. Now, both the left and the right criticize this government description of poverty. On the left, the major criticism is government has this poverty level too low. They don't count what are called the near poor, that people that make 125% of the poverty line. And that if you count the near poor, you come out with a calculation that about 25% of Americans really live in poverty. That, in fact, another criticism is that the government doesn't take into account regional differences when it sets this poverty line at 26.2. 26,200 is different if you live in Nebraska versus Washington, D.C. Another criticism, coming mostly from the left, is that the government doesn't count these people that think they're poor. That is, there is such a concept as relative deprivation, that people have an idea that I should live about at this level, but I live about this level here, and that there's a relative deprivation, a psychological part of poverty that isn't really captured by this poverty line explanation. On the political right, they criticize the government's description of poverty, that in fact it doesn't count family assets. It only takes income into account. People have cars, houses, savings, things of that nature. That ought to be factored in, according to the political right. Also, that many people will be counted as living in poverty who aren't really living in poverty. That is, students who are temporarily their economic situation will be low, but this is only temporary and they'll soon move out of it. Finally, the right thinks that the official poverty definition doesn't count what we call in-kind benefits. That is, benefits that are paid out to people, like food stamps, Medicaid, housing, and things of that nature. That's not factored in when we do this description of poverty. Now, what are the characteristics of poor people in America? First of all, there's a family structure. What has happened is that there are many more births out of wedlock and then much more common divorce in the United States, so that female headed households with children really have a high poverty rate in the United States. I've seen the poverty rate, I've looked it up, 50%. 50% of female headed households live below the poverty line. The term feminization of poverty has come to characterize this problem that we have in the United States. Uh, People on the right tend to blame the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution has disattached males from the children that they father, and they've kind of disappeared, and now we're left with women trying to raise the children by themselves. Uh, Another misconception of poverty in the United States is that, in fact, people think that Americans tend to think, when they think of people in poverty, that people of color are predominate, and that's not the case. Two-thirds of the people that live below the poverty line in America are white people. And I think that misconception might come from the fact that most people in the middle class and the upper middle class don't come in contact with a lot of people that live below the poverty line. And what happens is what they know about poverty, they see from the media, from communications companies. And communication companies are in our big cities where there are a large number of people, say black poor people, that live in the cities. When you leave the cities and go to rural America, there are a lot of poor people and they tend to predominantly be white. I think that's where that misconception comes from. And then another misconception is age. People in America tend to have in their minds this idea that people who live below poverty are old people. But when we look at the actual statistics, senior citizens economically do pretty well in the United States. The people who do not do well are children. Uh, Children have a much greater chance of living in poverty than the senior citizens in the United States. Now, the left and the right disagree on this description of poverty. They also disagree on this important question: what causes poverty? Why are some people poor and others are not? The explanation on the political left, I think, is that the capitalist system itself is responsible for poverty. It gives great advantages to people who are well off and wealthy, and they use their advantages. They really exploit people that are not doing well economically, and also they pass on their status to their children. I think there's something to be said for this. People I know in the upper middle class, they spend a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to make sure their children do well, and their children will be in the upper middle class. Whereas people that are below, that are born to families that are just at the subsistence level, they don't have that kind of advantage to their life. The Pew Organization has done over the decades a long-term economic mobility project. You can look up some of the details, but some of the things that are important from this economic mobility project is that they're trying to look at, if you're born at a certain level in the United States and then you're an adult, what are your chances that you move up and down, that there's mobility, economic mobility? From that project, we know that 43% of people born in the bottom quintile, the bottom 20%, will be in that same quintile when they're adults. That in fact, if you're born into the top quintile, the top 20% in the United States, 40%, you got a 40% chance that you will be in that top quintile when you're an adult. If you're born into the bottom quintile, what are your chances that when you're an adult you'll be in the top quintile? 4%. So one chance in 25. Not good odds. And if you're raised in the top quintile, what are your chances that when you're an adult you'll be in the bottom quintile? That's 8%. So not a real good chance that you move down. What happens is the family into which you're born has a big input into what you're going to be like and your opportunities when you're adult. That's what we take away from that. Now, what do we do about this problem? The solution from the political left. Well, the political left has been building for about 80 years in the United States a social welfare state. And the idea behind it is to keep a modified capitalist state, but have the state interfere with markets and redistribute wealth through a graduated income tax on one hand that takes more money from the wealthy people in the United States and feeds it off to help people that are in means-tested programs that will lift them up. Things like the minimum wage and food stamps. Education is largely socialized in the United States. Medicaid that pays the medical bills for people that live below the poverty line. This has been the strategy from the left. Uh, it's the main focus of social welfare liberalism, as we discussed under ideology. We have had more input, I think, into recent years on the political left that since capitalism is causing this, if we attack capitalism, that is through socialism, we can also attack this problem. It seems to be picking up socialism in the United States, especially among you younger people. I think that Senator Sanders' floundering in the primary showed that this social welfare state look at poverty is still probably the dominant one on the political left. The social welfare state comes from progressivism, this idea that government has the responsibility to act to alleviate these problems and to use experts that come out of our university to do that. The major thrust in dealing with this problem of poverty really started with Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. And we can look at two ways that the Roosevelt administration tried to attack this problem of poverty. The first idea was that we should try to prevent poverty in the United States. And this is where the Social Security system comes in trying to prevent poverty. I would say when I ask Americans, and I often do, I ask them, what do you think is the most successful government program? I think probably Social Security gets more votes than any other program. It was started in 1935 by the Roosevelt administration. And the idea behind it was as people age and get older, they're thrust into poverty because they can really no longer work. And what we can do is take some money out of their wages when they're younger, and then they can get that back when they're retired to prevent poverty. Uh, the the main functioning part of Social Security is the OASDI, the Old Age Survivors Disabilities Insurance. And it's funded by that dedicated tax that you can look on your paycheck and see FICA, FICA, the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, which said that we're going to take money out of your check, put it in the Social Security fund, and then pay it off to people when they're retired or disabled, whatever happens. The the FICA tax was only 3% in 1935 when it started, and it's moved up since then because we've had a taxing of Social Security funding in recent decades. It is now at 6.2% taken out of your check and 6.2% that's added by your employer, and together that's sent to Social Security. So it's 12% and some change that funds the Social Security system. Now, this 12% is sent every quarter. When you began to work, for me it was 1966. And what do you get out of that? Well, I have here what the Social Security Agency sent me with my 65th birthday. A report entitled Your Social Security Statement. And it has in here, going all the way back to when I first started to work in the 1960s. It has every year and how much it's taken out of my check and how much it's added up. And then it has the important page for everybody. This is the page that lays out what are your benefits. And it's based upon the idea that you have a full retirement age, which for me is 66 years old. If you're born after 1959, your full retirement age is 67. They've moved it up. Maybe in the future they'll move it up more. But as it stands now, Social Security was telling me that at age 66, your first retirement, your full retirement age, Doug, you will get $1,876 per month. That is calculated on 35 years in which you paid the most into Social Security. There's a formula that takes those 35 and calculates that amount. Now, that's if you retire at your full retirement age. You can retire before that and draw Social Security from age 62, but you're going to get less. If you delay after 62, it goes up about 8% every year until you get to be age 70, at which you got to take Social Security at that point. It won't increase anymore. So I've put off taking Social Security because I could afford it. And I just turned 70, so I got my first Social Security check last month. And instead of $1,876, it's $2,900. It goes up as you don't take Social Security for that time. The general strategy is that people in good health, if they can afford it, put off until you're 70 years old to get Social Security. If your health is not good, then you probably should start taking money at age 62. That's the general strategy. But Social Security is more than just paying out this pension. The Social Security also has a disability insurance element to it. So they're telling me in my Social Security report, if you are disabled, you can get $1,806 a month until you get better or for the rest of your life. Also, if you die and you have children that are below the ages of 18, for each child, they can collect $1,407 a month until the age of 18. And if you have a spouse or a guardian that's watching those children, they also get a payment of $1,807 per month. So this total family benefit can be no more than $3,300 a month. This is how Social Security works. And there are from time to time calls for reforming this, in which the left and the right disagree about this, what should be done. It came out in the 1980s that people thought there was a problem with Social Security because a main part of it is that younger people feel Well, I'll get this money taken out of my check and then I'll get it when I'm older, so that there's a compact between the different generations. Uh, a negative part to this is that when younger people begin to feel they're taking all this money out of my check and it's not going to be there for when I need to retire. And we became aware of that in the United States of the 1980s. There was a famous poll that was done. They asked young people in your age group, they asked them a number of questions. One question they asked them was, do you think the Earth has been visited by aliens from another planet? Well, a certain percentage said yes to that. Further on down in the questionnaire, they asked people, when you retire, do you think Social Security system will be there from you? A certain percent said yes there. But that number that said yes to Social Security was less than the number that said yes to aliens visiting the Earth. And people began to see there's a problem with Social Security and we got to try to reform it. So, some of the reasons for the reform. Well, it used to be in 1935 when they started Social Security, there were 10 workers paying in for every one worker who took out. Now it's down to 3 to 1. There's only 3 people paying in for every one person taking money out. Part of the problem is demographic, but part of the problem is a good thing. That in 1935, people lived to 61 years of age. Now people live into their late 70s, so they draw from Social Security for so many more years. Uh, there's also this demographic problem of the baby boomers. Between 46 and 60, a lot of people were born. And people realized in the 1980s that we're looking at the future of Social Security, that this is going to really tax the system because there'll be so many people retired and the younger people won't be able to pay enough out. Well, you got to do something about that. When you try to change Social Security in this town, it's called the third rail. You know, when you're waiting at a metro station, waiting for the train, you see that third rail over there that has a skull and a crossbones? If you touch it, you're dead. That's what people think about Social Security in Washington. They don't want to be stuck with the idea that they're hurting Social Security. So the parties didn't go after it. How do we deal with that in the United States? We usually have a blue ribbon commission. And in the 1980s, Alan Greenspan was the head of the Greenspan Commission, and they looked at the problem with Social Security, and they agreed that we have to change Social Security. We got to take more out of people's checks than we pay out now, so that we can build up a trust fund over time. So the Greenspan Commission got our Social Security subtraction from our checks at 12% and some change, and that was more than we needed in the 1980s. So what we've done is we've accumulated money in a trust fund called the Social Security Trust Fund. Uh, Last year, it's up to $3 trillion now. Last year was the first year that we took in less money than we paid out in Social Security, so we have to use that trust fund. And Social Security, the trustees tell us that that trust fund will last to 2034. And then in 2034, the trust fund will be exhausted. So we should start thinking now about some changes that we should make to the Social Security fund. Uh, Next time, I'm going to talk about the changes to Social Security that are proposed. And then I'll also look at Franklin Roosevelt, his administration's attempt to how do we alleviate, not only can we try to prevent poverty, but how do we alleviate people that are already living in poverty? We'll do that next time. What I'll do now is I'll load this up to YouTube and send you the link. You should already have it if you're seeing it, obviously. And I'll set up a discussion board on Blackboard where you can ask questions or comment about this topic. So I'll put up Thursday the second part of this talk about poverty. Take care.